Okay, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for being here, honoring our great friend, Professor Santiago Legarre, the Catholic University in Buenos Aires. Santiago started his career with gold. I read on his CV gold medal that he has received from the university where he is a professor now, but he's also had a PhD in law from the University of Buenos Aires in his work on police power and public morality. And in doing this project, you've been traveling a lot, because I know traveling is key to understand your talk of the day, with visit at University of Notre Dame, Columbia Law School, University College, Oxford, many prestigious places indeed. You've taught here in the past and presently comparative constitutional law, but also at the University of Notre Dame, at Valparaiso University, and in Kenya. And I guess we will learn more about your experience in Kenya. I won't give the full list of your many publications, but interestingly, you are a Louisiana scholar, okay, because your papers have been published in the Louisiana Law Review, in the Journal of Civil Law Studies, in Loyola. I didn't check in Tulane, but there may be also things there. And well, we are delighted having you with us and for a lunch promenade talk, right, about teaching in different places. So please join me in welcoming Santiago.
Such a pleasure to be back and to have you here. Exactly 2 years ago, I was introduced by my dear friend Olivier at some other room here at the Law Center, and after the talk, I maybe in the Q&A, the dean, who hadn't been a dean for long, I suppose, back then, made what I took to be a very kind remark of the sort: surely we will invite you to teach a class as a visiting professor again, as we did in the past. It was 9 years ago that I was teaching here for the last time. And then after the talk, we went for lunch with Sam and Professor Jim Stoner from across the street, so to speak, was there, and he said, you got an invitation to teach again. And I say, what do you mean? The dean, he said it, and this was video recorded, so now he has to invite you. Well, he did. Surely not because of the video recording no one cares for, and surely thanks to Professor Moroto as well. I know, I think most of you, but not all. I am delighted to see there is such a broad age span. Now, I think you don't ask, even in these times, I think you don't ask women their age, but Jim Bowers told me Bill Crawford told me that he's 91, and Camille, I'm sure, is like very far from there, so it's nice too that we have that. Because some of you don't know me, and because I need to talk about something, I will first tell you how I got here and there to Africa, so that you understand how is it that I will dare to make some comparative remarks of that sort. Africa, the United States, and of course South America. I am from Argentina. I'm based there. I taught for 12 years at Austral University and for 12 years at Catholic University, where I am now. exactly at the time where I moved from one to the other. Olivier, together with a group of students and professors, including John Devlin, came to Argentina for a very famous exchange program, short-lived, but who knows? Maybe they'll tell us later about the future. When I was in the first of the two schools I taught at in Argentina, Austral, that is in Buenos Aires, I got a call from the dean. I remember very well, it was in February of 2001, because I remember where I was then, doesn't matter, but I was in Mendoza, the wine country. And the dean said, Julio Cueto Rua has called me, and he says he's looking for 3 guys he's going to interview to see if one of them might be chosen to teach a short course at LSU. I'll be frank with you, I didn't know about LSU's existence back then. He asked me, would you be willing to be one of those 3 guys? And I said, sure, of course. And then the famous visit to Argentina by John J. Costones, the then chancellor, now dean, or no, he's not dean, he's former chancellor, or should I say former dean, and of course Saul Litvinov. They came together and we went for dinner to Julio Cueto Rua's house. We were just talking about Julio with Bill and with Grace a few minutes ago. This magnificent gentleman who taught for 20 years at SMU, and after that came invited by Saul to LSU to teach full semester courses for I don't know how many years. He was one of my professors there. The part of the interview that had to do with Julio was a walk in the park. Of course, the problem was John Costones, and not to speak Saul Litvinov, in very different ways, but like to have them one next to the other, it wasn't something you would envy. Well, after a long time, 2 years, I got a call. I was with a fever in my room. I picked up a landline, and it was John Costones himself. No secretary or no one transferred the call, and he asked me if I would like to come. I was very afraid. This would be the first time I would teach abroad. I would teach in English. And here comes my first humble conclusion after having done it, and that is that you can make comparative observations, but teaching is the same everywhere. And people are the same essentially everywhere, and good students are the same everywhere. So my first intermediate conclusion is it doesn't matter so much where you teach, in what country you teach, or in what language for that matter, or the culture of the people. Kenyan people have a different culture. It doesn't matter. What matters is the stuff. Are they ambitious, focused, brilliant, intelligent students? If you have that, then we will see there are differences, and I hope it might be interesting for you to observe them. But what is more important is what is not different. Let me tell you just something about that January 2003 visit here. The main question I would like to touch upon is, why was I invited to return in 2005 and in 2010? Well, here is a theory. These were the days where Bill Corbett didn't have a beard or a tan, but he was already a great runner. And his running partner was, of course, Cheney Joseph Jr., whose tie that says "Bah Humbug" I'm wearing right now. And as you all know, they would go from here with Judge Lou Daniels and Judge McDonald and Bebo and Michelle Forbes, and perhaps I'm forgetting one or two. And I was asked, maybe by Bill, because I was more or less next door, would you like to join? And my idea was that I needed to do whatever, in order to fit, more or less, was part of the, so I went. And then we had beer, which I found very extravagant and contradictory, but of course, but very helpful at the same time, especially as it was light. I think Miller Lite, no, Natural Light. And I overheard a remark of Cheney's to someone. The remark was, I like the way Santiago runs. He runs at my same, that is, slow pace. So I thought, of course, I will be the slow runner that I always was anyways, but now I adjusted a little bit to a 70-year-old person. And then I was invited to return. And then we ran, and I taught, and I ran, and I taught, and I ran. Well, I hope this is partly a joke, although you didn't seem to laugh very much. I hope I did something well other than running, but maybe not. One thing I can't forget from those days, and this showed how much Cheney liked my running, was one day in my second visit. I was in someone else's office, the phone rings, and the person says, "It's Cheney. He wants to know if you would stay a few more weeks and teach another credit, because something had happened and some students needed an extra credit, and he wanted to know." I mean, it was a class I hadn't ever taught, but it was a great challenge and opportunity. I remember too that in that course I had a student, maybe you had her, called Lauren Cangelosi, who married Michael Kansian, one of the guys who went to Argentina. And they are now in Houston, and I'm going to see them this coming weekend as I travel there on urgent business. I don't know if you were aware of this, but the Houston Rockets are playing Oklahoma Thunder on Saturday, and the Cirque du Soleil is in Houston. That's the good thing of having former students spread around. I wouldn't know. Well, I did a few other teaching experiences which Olivier mentioned in the US, I mean. I will only mention them because of their connection to LSU. One day, the then vice dean of Valparaiso Law School, I think a law school that almost no longer exists, but maybe almost, he came to Argentina and he was talking to people at different schools. I was now at Catholic, and we had breakfast, and I told him about what I was doing at LSU, and they had never done that at Valparaiso, as they have it in many other schools, especially back then. But he thought this was a brilliant idea, bringing someone from abroad, have the person give a short course. So he said, "Would you do it with us too?" And I said, "Sure." So I went there twice, and Valparaiso is a university and also a town not far from South Bend, where the University of Notre Dame is. So one day a friend I made in Valparaiso said, "Would you like to drive to Notre Dame?" And I said, "Sure, why not?" So I drove with him, and again, talking to the then vice dean, a friend of my friend, that's how the Notre Dame opportunity came up. And then there is Kenya. I've been teaching a short course similar to this one in Nairobi for the last 7 years. The way it happened again was through a friend. This friend sends emails to his friends, and he sent one from Nairobi with pictures of animals. I've always loved animals, and especially African animals, so much so that when I learned that there was a reserve in Clinton and a zoo in Baton Rouge, I thought seriously about going to both of them. then I read the newspaper and I read things about the zoo, and maybe I won't go after all. But anyways, I told my friend, what do you do in order to teach there and be able to go on one of those safaris? And long story short, he was friends with the dean of a new law school. They wanted to give it an international angle, and they invited me to teach a short course there too. So after having been coming to the US and to Kenya for a few years, I've been developing a few comparative observations. I told you already that the main one is that there is a fundamental similarity when there is excellence. But there are, I think, some interesting differences. The first one, maybe you've thought about this, maybe you haven't, is the peculiar circumstance of law being a graduate degree in the United States, and more or less only in the United States, and law being an undergraduate degree that you study at the age of 18 in Argentina, in Kenya, in Europe, and so on and so forth. I learned talking to Christabel that in Canada, the Francophone part of the country follows the European, South American undergraduate system, and then the rest of Canada is like the US. I didn't know this. So it's pretty different when you're teaching 18 years old people, especially these days, and when you're teaching a group where maybe 5 are married, or 1, as it was the case with me my second time here, she was 8 months into her pregnancy. In Argentina or in Kenya, you have many disciplinary issues to deal with that I think, lucky you, are generally out of the radar of the American professor. In general, he doesn't need to think about this. One of the students who came to Argentina from LSU, Casey Cowley, who now lives in New Orleans, he wrote an account of what he saw in Argentina one semester there for the civilian when he came back. I encouraged him strongly to do so, and then I regretted a bit having done so, because one of the highlights of the piece was, so he took my class there, a first year class then. So in first year I had 80 students in my class, out of which 25 were 17-year-olders who would turn 18 before July. That's the rule. And the rest, they were 18. So I spent some time in my first class saying things such as this, for example. Not everyone does it, but I do it and I find it effective. I say, guys, you need to think that class is more or less like when you took a trip with your parents from here to Oxford, Mississippi. They would tell you, guys, perhaps you need to go to the bathroom before we start this trip because we're not going to stop. And I say this to you, I would say, because I don't want people getting out of the room all the time, interrupting, coming back. And of course, we know that 80% of the time they're going out only because they're bored or tired, especially when they are younger. So Casey reported all this in his article here in the Civilian, and people were thinking, whoa, in Argentina, a law school is like high school. Well, it is like high school, of course. Well, maybe some of you may want to dispute this and may say that law students are also like high school students. I don't know. I had an experience once that alerted me to this possibility of this, equaling of the. I had in a class I taught at Notre Dame once a no laptop policy, and one time a friend of mine who knew I was going to teach about something asked me, the same way John Devlin would and does, if he could come to that class. And I said, as I say to him, of course, you're very welcome. He came, he sat in the back, he was invisible. But after class, he told me, remember that student, the girl that sits exactly in front of where I was sitting? Yes, I say, she's one of the best students in the class. And he goes, yes, I noticed how she participated often. Yeah, I know, I said. Well, this is what you don't know. She had her laptop on her lap, disguised by the table, and she would look at you and smile and laugh, and then she walked back here to her business, which was completely unrelated, of course, to the class. I think she was into the NFL and was checking, something like this was what my friend reported. Anyways, that day it was like a humbling experience that you're not the master of the world. You think here they're listening to you with all your charm, but punctuality, of course, is another great issue with undisciplined young people, which certainly here is not an issue. Here, it was one of the things that when I first came in 2003, I couldn't believe it. I would arrive to the classroom and everyone was there. Gosh, I mean, you couldn't imagine what punctuality is about there. Here's the definition of punctuality in Kenya, which applies to some classes too. Punctual is the person who guesses how late the other person will arrive. That's a punctual person. It takes some thinking to understand what this means. So if you apply it to a professor, he typically arrives 25 minutes late because there's patterns. Anyways, then cell phones, of course, another great problem with undergraduates, but maybe not only with undergraduates. And then something more interesting, perhaps, and to illustrate it, I will show you a short video, and then I'll make a few more remarks, and we'll open it, if that's okay. With undergraduates, you can experiment some teaching methods that you can hardly try with graduates, because they will think, and maybe rightly so, that you're treating them like children. And you don't want that because you want to keep your job, among other more important reasons. Instead, in Kenya or in Argentina, but the example of the video will be of Kenya, and then you'll get to know my students through the video. I didn't want to show a video in which I would feature, but the other day when we were at the clinic, and I saw you were there at some point and you survived, I thought, okay, I'll pluck up courage and I'll stay and show the video. Art. This is what this is about. Art in the classroom. So children draw things. Well, these law students draw legal concepts. And it goes really well. And because in Kenya people are very good singers, this experiment I did exactly the same in Argentina with the same success, but the singing part in Argentina didn't fly. In Kenya, on the other hand, everyone sings and dances. So in between the display of one drawing or another, some of the students would sing like this. I'm happy during the Q&A shortly to come to answer any questions you might have about this, but so that you know, 7 of these students and the Argentine ones who do a similar thing have been already to Prague with this scholarship, more or less one every year. This was 2013. And then we start with the whole group, 75 in this case. We cut 16 with the help of drawing assistants. From the 16 you cut to 8. From the 8 you cut to the podium of 3. And then the best. And what matters is not the artistic merit so much, but who manages to convey in a visual way whatever concept it is. In this particular case, the foundations of the regulatory state, but they're having other topics, federalism when I did it for constitutional law in Argentina, separation of powers. Okay, a few more things and I wrap it up. exams. When John Costones came to Argentina, he couldn't believe that our exams were oral. We have oral exams, oral final exams. He asked me if he could come with me to the exams. He did, and he was like, what? Of course, this, among other considerations, this gets away with anonymity. In our part of the world, South America, that is, Kenya is anonymous, written and anonymous. Argentina and some other South American countries, it is crucial for you to know who it is you are evaluating. This is part of the teaching process. So if it's oral, it is very clear. And when there are midterm written exams, you know, you read the name of the person and you think, this is very clear. The person was distracted all the time in class and so on and so forth. And then you want to talk to the person. So we don't like anonymity. For me, it was like one of the challenges, one of the new things. So I would grade, and I do everything anonymous. And as I was doing it, because I found it so boring when it's anonymous, I would try to guess. I would do my who is who, and I would put the names, and more or less 80% of the times I got it wrong, which made me think there's something strange in this system. People who are silent in class, never contribute, they get the best marks. Maybe we need to get rid of law school and just do exams. Just kidding. What else? Anything else? The case method. Julio Cuetorrua has a very famous book in Spanish on the case method. I read it and I came to the US, to the 3 schools where I taught, thinking this will be a festival of the case method, and I found that it's not, that there is less of that than what we think there would be. So there is more of a convergence between the teaching styles that I've seen in the United States and the ones that we use in Argentina. And then, of course, now in Argentina, the common law and some of its methods, stare decisis especially, are receiving enormous attention. The going abroad trend is something I've seen in all 3 places. It's very much related with the enormous amount of recommendation letters that I get asked. The main reason being that in our part of the world and in Kenya, a recommendation letter works like this. The student typically goes to a professor, not to me. You will understand why. This is why I get so many requests. They go and the person says, sure, of course, I'll do it for you, which means I will sign whatever you write praising yourself. That's how recommendation letters work in our part of the world, and same in Kenya. So when they find out that there is one guy or 2 guys who do the real thing, everyone goes to them. I've had conversations with admissions people in some good schools in the US telling me that they have already identified what they call Argentine recommendation letters, and they break them like this and throw them into the bin. Right. Finally, I've found very useful in order to develop a bit what you could call the pastoral dimension of a professor. I think that's how they call it in Kenya. A way to keep in touch with them. So maybe 12 years ago, I started a list where those who want, and after they're done with my class, they send an email to an administrator of the list, a former student, and then they will receive from time to time an email from me, and the rest will be blind copied. I have 250 people, more or less, now in the list from different places. When I started doing it, I think this was before Twitter. One of my students, when Twitter came out, he said to me, you should be on Twitter. Back then I didn't understand Twitter very well. Now I still don't. But I suppose a main difference between this and Twitter is that I suppose in Twitter you're writing to everyone, and I don't know, maybe you need to or want to, but I want to write to those students who want to hear from me. So I tell them what I'm up to. This is a new thing I wrote, an op-ed, or this is a talk I'm giving, or I recommend a movie or a book, that kind of thing, which went quite well. Should I stop here in case anyone wants to contribute or ask?
Thank you, Santiago. I think I should go.
Thank you.
I love that classroom environment that you've been working in, on the grass and under the trees. And I think we could do well here. It sometimes happens to us when we have a fire alarm, right? We find ourselves under the stately oaks there. I sympathize with the recommendation letter. I've been during many years in Lyon, the only professors being able to write a decent letter of recommendation in English. This is why I left Lyon, and I never told that before. And the art, regarding the art, I couldn't help remember. I have in my kitchen, could have shown you yesterday, a caricature of mine where I'm portrayed in class, but that was at a time when a student was making a presentation. And if you want a portrait of Olivier Moreto board, this is, you really have it. I think if you want to have the equivalent portrait, have me sit at a faculty or committee meeting, at some boring moment. But art in the classroom can be quite interesting. This afternoon I will use Swiss cheese because I have to explain internal gaps or lacuna in the Convention on the International Sale of Goods and the external lacuna. So I have a piece of cheese with a hole on the edge.
I think that the art, the drawing thing, is especially useful for visual people, visual learners. I think they are more or less 80% of those of us. So, for example, you need to think of something and you make a drawing for yourself. That's the idea, that you make a drawing that's the idea. Yeah. And the fire and you're going out in Kenya, one of the reasons I started having classes outdoors sometimes was that I would arrive to the room and the room would be taken. There wasn't a fire alarm. So they said, go to some other room. And I went and it was also taken. And then I said, okay, let's not waste time. We go outdoors.
What was your subject matter in Kenya that you were teaching?
I've taught in Kenya Introduction to Law. I've taught Jurisprudence. And I've taught Law and Religion, which is like religious freedom law. Those three. So one is a first-year course, and one is a third-year course, and the other one is a fourth-year course. When law is an undergraduate degree, it's a longer degree. I studied 6 years law. Now my school is a 5-year degree. In Kenya, it's a 4-year degree. Less than 4, well, in England, it's 3. I suppose you can do less than 4. Yeah.
Is there a jurisprudential reporting system in Kenya?
There is.
How do they keep and house their case law similar to the United States?
Yeah, British, imperfect, quite good though. Yeah, very British.
I don't know of any international visitor who's been here more times than you have. I could be wrong about that, but you've been frequently with us. So you've seen us up close and personal. Do you have any thoughts about how we can make the international visiting program stronger here? Maybe based on what you've seen elsewhere, what you've experienced directly yourself. How can we make this a better experience for people like you and our students?
Wow. Should I answer that question?
The tape is on.
Oh dear. You like ABBA?
Yeah? Those are Norwegian, right?
Not the movie, not Here We Go Again, but the song Money, Money, Money. You know that one? That would be a short answer.
Well, one thing is sure, you alluded to this, Cheney, when it was, was picking or proposing a list of prospective visitors, say, don't forget Santiago.
Really?
I need him to run. And
That's
when
so
we
nice.
suspended the program, his running ability, maybe has been, it was not good for him. He needed you.
That's nice.
But when we had the run in Buenos Aires, the only run of the summer program, you were hired for academic reasons.
Yeah, I remember.
And you alluded to the future of the program. It had been approved for 2 years.
Oh, yeah.
And we've been running it only once. The condition for it to be continued afterwards was that we had to be financially break even or have a minimal profit. We still have that one card in our pocket, Tom. We're going to discuss that one day.
Yeah, well, back to Greg's, I think I could give you a more serious and less important answer to the question. I think you don't need to do anything once you bring the right person. Now, I'm not talking about me, of course, but I think that both the students and the faculty appreciate the presence of the alien, so to speak. For me, now I do speak about me here, I receive that all the time. And I don't do anything in particular, you just do what you know you should do. And so I don't think the case needs much proving. What it needs is ABBA.
I think that's an excellent answer. I'm here because you intrigued me.
Thank
And
you.
You're an alien.
Pablo, don't say that.
No, you said it yourself, but I certainly like ABBA. I certainly like money, money, money. It makes the world. But
Would you
I
say-
want to reminisce a bit. You said over there, talk to me about Cheney, and you're going to mention Cheney, the Equator Rule in your discussion. Then you got to beer, which is an interesting subject matter even for Senate Judiciary Committee here.
I know.
But what was Cheney Joseph's favorite beer?
Mhm.
Judge Lou Daniel asked me that, so I challenge you. What was his favorite beer?
Natural light.
No, the answer is free beer. It is true. It's free. That's right. It's a good line. You don't like that? I'm laughing.
Can I ask a question about the move from Australia
Certainly.
to Kenosha?
Certainly.
My sense when I taught there was that the students at Australia were from relatively privileged backgrounds.
I remember your remark.
And
then.
well, I didn't remember saying it then, but I guess I say it now. And my sense is the students at Católica are less so. And I'm curious if that makes a difference in terms of the classroom atmosphere, or what you teach, or how you teach, or anything. Is there any difference in terms of how the students react to you?
Good question. I would say, insofar as the admission filter remains similar, a similar bar in both schools and in other schools similar to Austral, then the atmosphere is quite similar. I find the atmosphere a bit different, but on account of social or socio-economic considerations that don't go along with excellence, because you can have excellence on both sides of the divide. So in UCA, in Universidad Católica, I think I want to say that I have less posh students than I did proportionally in Austral. But in both, the atmosphere when it came to what I needed to teach a class that went okay was fine. And in fact, especially in the first years, after my transition, I got together groups of students from both schools, and they mesh really well. So they aren't completely dissimilar schools, although they are similar. Catholic is more or less 9 times bigger than Austral, and therefore the pool is,
The reason why I asked is I think part of the history of this school was to be for the students who couldn't afford, a place like Tulane or something like that. We were intended to be the school for everyone else. And I think we've drifted away from that. I think our student body now is probably in a somewhat different socioeconomic place than our students were 30 years ago.
I see.
And I'm just curious, I'm trying to work through a note, if that makes a difference in terms of the questions that we ask.
Right.
That the students might work.
Right.
So I was just curious.
Okay. Thank you.
I have a question.
Yes.
And hi, I'm Lisa Alperos. I just started here.
Hi, Lisa.
Yeah, we haven't met before.
Nice to meet you.
Um,
Never too late.
Yeah, you as well. So I was wondering what you've seen in terms of women and female enrollment in law schools and the places you've been. That's been a huge change in recent decades in the United States. And I was on a trip to Cuba back in '97 where there were personnel from the law school speaking with our group saying that in Cuba, 90% of the class, of the law school class in Cuba was female. And so I wondered what is going on in Argentina and Kenya and so forth.
Okay, thank you. In Argentina, since I started teaching, the proportion was more or less half and half, but in the last few years, there has been a slight increase of the proportion of women studying law.
So they're more than half now.
Now, yes, now maybe they are 55%. But in Kenya, it's amazing what's going on. In Kenya, when I started teaching, now I cannot say that what I'll say is a general thing, but I tell you what I saw. It was half and half when I started teaching in 2012. This year, as a result of a curve, a progressive curve, I had 2/3 of women in the classroom. Yeah.
Any sense of where that's coming from?
No, not really, not me. It's interesting though.
That's an undergraduate class.
Yeah. I can tell you though, and I find it very interesting. This school where I've been teaching in Kenya for 7 years, Strathmore Law School in Nairobi, they give an award in the ceremony, in the graduation ceremony, like in many other places, to the top student in the class. And it has always been a girl. Always. Then they give one to anyone with more than X GPA, and this is the same in Argentina. We call it honor diploma. So golden medal for the person first and honor diploma. And more or less between 80 and 85% of those who get this diploma are female students in law.
Percentage of women is increased dramatically in Europe go beyond 60% or to about 2/3. Access to the judiciary in countries where it's not as prestigious as here, when you do this as kind of career, it's now 2/3 of women. Yeah. It's not reflected the higher you go to the top, the higher score, still men have the lead. And men in Europe tend to go maybe predominantly very selective program. Yeah, you find an equilibrium again.
Now, there are more women in United States colleges today than there are men. Across the board, statistically, they do better. They persist at higher rates. Their scores are slightly higher. This may get to what you talked about high school. And I think all of us here would say that's probably true, that undergrad may be more like high school than law school, but we're increasingly seeing that we're playing a guidance counselor role, that people are needier and needier all the time. Maybe men are needier than women are. But it's also true that at the elite institutions, somehow they managed to be 50-50. So, which I read to be affirmative action for men to make it 50-50. I mean,
They have a big applicant pool, so they can choose, they can choose.
well, but interestingly, demographically, more women, they do better across the spectrum, but the elite pick their pool and they match. And if you go to our vet school, which is probably our most competitive school at LSU to get into, it's way more women than men. I mean, way more women than men. So they're just smarter.
Well, faculty at the vet school is also largely female as well. You all know two faculty members, I don't.
Yeah, they have a lot of seniors who are men.
Yeah,
I mean, look at us,
okay. Yeah. A lot of
right?
people,
Yeah.
The older the better.
Correct. Yeah.
I've
So I think that
heard,
must be cross-cultural.
Yep, it is. Yep.
we've heard women are smarter. We may want this to be the word of the end for today's session.
And the microphones are on, so
You have been bringing us to what is essential to all of us, the classroom. And wherever we are, indeed, we are in classrooms. And thank you.
Thank
very
you
much.
so much. Thank you.
yeah, you